I'm going to share with you 12 amazing, incredible, life-changing, thought-provoking books that I recommend you read. I'm recommending 12 because maybe you'll read one a month. These are books that I found provocative, thought-provoking, and life-altering in some way. And also, there's no particular order in which I'm sharing these books. I'm not ranking them. I'm just going off of how I wrote them down. If you've read any of the books on this list, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about them. And if you have any recommendations for life-changing books, please also leave those in the comments below. Anyway, let's get into it. So book number 1 is Waterlily by Cara Deloria. This is a book that was introduced to me in university. There are 3 words that come to mind when I think of this book: beautiful, kinship, and historical. It follows a woman named Bluebird, and it starts in her early life when she and her grandmother leave their camp to go seek out berries. When they return, they find that their camp has been pillaged and all of their people are slaughtered. They're the only survivors, and it's gut-wrenching. Their lives are tragically changed with this, and they're left wandering and are eventually adopted by another Dakota tribe who takes them in, and as Bluebird grows up, she's expected to marry and fill a cultural role as a woman. And this book delves into what it means to be a woman in Sioux culture, and kind of as an outsider as well, since she didn't initially belong to that tribe. She gets married and has children, and you follow her journey throughout that. Waterlily is the name of Bluebird's daughter, and Bluebird is the main character whose perspective we follow initially, but then eventually it evolves and we see Waterlily's journey through life. And it's such a beautiful fictional story of life in that time and what it meant to be a woman. You get a deep kind of ethnographical understanding of the role a woman played in her tribe, in her family life, and you see the cultural relevance and the strength of the matriarch. If you're interested in historical fiction, this is a beautiful read. I highly recommend it. Number 2 is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Machado. The 3 words that come to mind for this particular book are mind-bending, unique, and provocative. This is a book comprised of multiple short stories, and oh my gosh, when I say mind-bending, I'm not kidding. It truly is mind-bending. These stories take a very feminist approach to what life is like as a woman and her roles in society as a wife, as a mother, as a worker, as a colleague. All these different roles that a woman's expected to play, and it takes an extreme version of that and critiques and analyzes these roles in a way that is provocative, surreal, abstract, and very overstated. I'm going to read to you what one critic said about it because I found that their articulation is much better than I can say. So critics say that it's a psychological realism that maps the realities of women's lives and the violence upon their bodies. To give you an example, one short story is about a woman who wears a green ribbon around her neck, and she gets married to this man who constantly, throughout their marriage, tries to entice her to remove the green ribbon, and she tells him, "No, I cannot remove the ribbon, for I will perish." And despite knowing that she will perish, he still hounds her to remove this ribbon over time, and it leaves you feeling just very disturbed. There's also a novella in the book which reimagines Law and Order SVU in a completely different yet fascinating way. I won't go into the details of it because it's really mind-boggling, mind-bending. It will leave you feeling kind of like nails on a chalkboard in some ways, like very disturbed, but also you can't put it down because you want to know what's going on. Like, is this for real? Is there going to be some sort of twist where it all makes sense in the end? This is just one of those books that kind of reminds me of like Stanley Kubrick or some of these other mind-bending filmmakers, but without it actually being made into a film. It's provocative. It's really sexy in a weird way. I don't know how else to really describe that. I cannot recommend this enough if you are into women's studies or the study of feminism, or if you're just kind of intrigued by these mind-bending kind of psychological thriller type of books. This would be for you for sure. Number 3 is The Huntress by Quinn. If you love World War II historical fiction, this is for you. It follows the story of a Russian fighter pilot during World War II and a journalist and a lawyer who are all hunting down a Nazi war criminal known as the Huntress, this evil woman. And it jumps back and forth from different timelines and different perspectives, and it weaves together these lives of people who are affected by this woman, and they're all trying to piece together this mystery of where is she. Kate Quinn wrote this story based off of two separate women who actually existed, a prison guard and a wife of a high-up Nazi official. It brings a realness to it where you can think back and appreciate the time that we're in, and also honor the people who went through that time, because it really wasn't that long ago. It's such a great read. If you like riveting thriller mystery kind of novels, this would be for you as well. Number 4 is The Buddha in the Attic by Julia Otsuka. Oh, I remember reading this many years ago now, and it's so beautiful. The 3 words that come to mind when I think of this book are poetic, heart-wrenching, and historical. This is also a book of short stories that traces Japanese mail-order brides in their gut-wrenching stories about women on their wedding nights and the experience of that, losing their virginity and being expected to perform wifely duties, to child rearing, to surviving and having to find work in a racist America during World War II, when internment camps where Japanese Americans were ripped away from their communities and their families and imprisoned simply for being Japanese. And then also dealing with culture shock and adapting to white culture and dealing with cultural erasure. I recall this book with a lot of fondness, but it is very sad to read because, again, you learn about that cultural identity and erasure that just is heartbreaking. And these women came to the US as mail order brides, hoping for a good life here, only to be treated like property and to be treated like the other, and to have their identity stripped and redeveloped into a version of themselves that did not truly represent who they were as people, because they were not seen as human beings. They were not seen as individuals. It's kind of a sad thing to think about, but it was also beautifully written, so I recommend it for that reason. Number 5 is Playing Big by Tara Mohr. Okay, the 3 words that come to mind when I think of this book are ownership, transformative, and inspirational. Now, some backstory on this book. One of my work mentors told me about this incredible book that she had read, and it was life-changing, and one of her mentors had recommended it to her. And she told me that she was reading it at night and she just started bawling and just had an immense breakthrough with this book. And she is just not that person to just have an emotional identity crisis or a breakthrough like that. It's just not normally within her nature, and that's her explaining it to me why this was so impactful for her. I thought, okay, well, I'll need to read this book, so I ordered it. And at the time, I worked for a company, and I was the founder and president of the women's network there. After I read Playing Big, I realized I wanted to make this a broader, fuller scale thing for women in our company, and we ended up establishing, I think it was a 10 or 12 week reading and mentorship program around this book, and we were able to bring in Tara for a book discussion, and I was able to interview her, an interview that was shared with the whole company about the book and the impact it has. And we did like this big virtual visualization exercise, and it was so incredible to see the impact that this had had on so many different women from so many different walks of life. Tara dives deep into psychology and emotions and this desire we all have to be something bigger than ourselves. We play bigger, and it's this idea that sometimes we have imposter syndrome or this feeling of not being good enough, but you have to start from where you are. And she talks about fear in such a way that just clicked something in me, and it just kind of made me think about approaching life in a new way. She created these prompts to help you journal and write down your thoughts and to really encapsulate what your deepest desires are, even if you have no idea what you want in life. I found it so helpful, and to be able to find what your personal mission is in this life, what brings you joy, what brings you passion, what makes you fearful in the good way, what makes you want to step out of yourself and play bigger in your own life. I also finished reading that book feeling so empowered and so inspired to step beyond my own boundaries and play it big. Number 6 is Gulliver. If I could actually talk, that would be great. Let's have some more coffee, so maybe I won't be tongue-tied. Okay, let's try that again. Number 6 is Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Ew. This brings me back to high school. The 3 words that come to mind for this book are adventure, fantastical, and satirical. This is a book I discovered in my freshman year of high school. I was a library assistant and we had the most amazing, glorious library. Oh, I remember kind of perusing books one day and I had this lofty goal of potentially reading all the way through some of these books by the time I graduated high school. That didn't happen. We ended up moving mid-year. But anyway, I picked up that book, Gulliver's Travels, and I felt like I was transported into the imagination of an 18th century satirical social commentator. So Jonathan Swift writes a story about this man named Lemuel Gulliver, who is aboard a ship that becomes shipwrecked. And then in his attempt to get to land, he realizes he's not in what we consider a normal world. He looks around him and realizes this giant population of people are 6 inches tall. They're little people. They fit in the palm of his hand. But then this population's so powerful, they capture him and he's imprisoned. He's mistreated and yada yada yada, but it goes through this whole fantastical adventure of him being this giant in a world of 6-inch people. They live in an ironic way. Jonathan Swift uses the description of these people and their over-exaggerated ways of living to be social commentary for social flaws in 18th century England, which I found fascinating. Gulliver travels to another kingdom where instead of being this giant, he's now the 6-inch person, or rather these people are 72 feet tall, and he becomes an object of entertainment, and he's captured and put into a little house and he's sold to the queen and she uses him as entertainment, and then he's swooped away by an eagle, and then he finds himself on another adventure and more adventures and more adventures. But overall, the theme of this book is these fantastical adventures that just emphasizes the weirdest characteristics that people have. It's a fantastic read if you love satire, if you like adventure, you like thinking about things in different ways. This is a great read. I found it fun and funny, and I'm actually planning to reread it soon. Number 7 is The Shack by William Paul Young. Okay. The 3 words that come to mind for this book are challenging, thought-provoking, and forgiveness. My friend Dawn gifted me this book and she told me that I needed to read it. So let's dive into the plot. So Mac takes his 3 children to go camping and they're at a lake, and his 2 boys are in a canoe on the lake and the canoe capsizes, so he has to go rescue the 2 boys, and he leaves his daughter Missy on the beach. He returns to the beach and Missy's gone. And after a gut-wrenching search, they cannot find her, and eventually the police find a shack, an abandoned shack in the middle of the woods, and they find her bloody clothing. Based on the location and the evidence, they believe that she was killed by a serial killer. Mac receives this letter in the mailbox, and it's addressed to him and it's signed Papa. His own dad's not in his life. He had a bad relationship with his father. The only reference to Papa in his life is his wife's name for God. A lot of people think about God as just being this tyrannical, hard-hitting, disciplinary figure who has these strict rules you need to abide by, and you have to do these things or you'll go to hell. And this book challenges that notion and throws it completely out the window. Mac's wife takes the kids and she goes to visit family, and he's left at home, and he decides to go back to the shack. When he arrives to the shack, he doesn't find anything, but then eventually things start shifting and he finds himself in the company of God personified into 3 different people. For example, God the Father is seen as a black woman, and then later as a Native American man, and Jesus as a brown-skinned man who's average-looking, and then the Holy Spirit is seen as wise and kind of motherly in a way. The reason why this book is so riveting and compelling for me is it changes your perspective on who God is and the relationship you have with Him. The themes of this book are forgiveness and uncovering trauma and healing. Whew, I'm getting teary-eyed. In an interview William did with some press, he said that this book is a a metaphor for the house you build out of your own pain. So the shack is not only a physical place in the book where something horrific happened to Mac's daughter, but it also is a symbol of this entrapment that Mac lives in unforgiveness for himself, for letting his daughter be captured, the unforgiveness and anger and rage he has towards the kidnapper and killer. That relationship that he builds with each of these personas is so riveting. And in my own faith journey, it helped me finding forgiveness for those who abused me and hurt me, but also helping me to see how God sees all of us, how God sees even the most evil of people. And for me, that was so moving. But any of my Christian friends who are going through a really rough time or have trauma, unforgiveness, anger, and resentment towards other people, I give them this book and I say, read this because it's going to change your life. It's a beautiful story. It's so heartbreaking. There's so many points in that book where I just bawled my head off. I cannot recommend this book enough for its life-altering and visionary effect that it's had on my life. Number 8 is so nostalgic. It is The Magician's Nephew from C.S. Lewis, and this is part of the Chronicles of Narnia series. The 3 words that come to mind for this book are escapism, nostalgia, and whimsy. If you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, this is actually a prequel. It happens about 1,000 years before the events of that book take place. Although The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was the first book published in the series, and I think this was like the 5th or 6th one. By the way, there's 7 books in the series. But in chronological order, it's the first book. It's the story of how Narnia came to be. So it starts out in 19th century England, where a boy named Diggory and a girl named Polly live in adjoining houses and they become friends. Diggory's uncle has been diving into and exploring magic, and he creates these rings that he tricks Polly into taking, and it transports her into another world. Diggory's uncle Andrew gives him a similar ring with other rings that can be used to bring them back. Well, in this other world, Diggory quickly finds Polly, and it's a desolate city that's full of statues. As they're wandering, they come across this bell, and Diggory decides to ring the bell. Despite Polly telling him not to, all of a sudden, all the statues come back to life. And one of the statues is this incredibly tall, harsh woman who turns out to be an evil queen. Both Polly and Diggory realize that she's evil and they escape, but she follows them back to England and she wreaks havoc on London, and the two have to heroically try to figure out how to save London but also transport her back to her world. It's just a really fun story, adventure, fantastical kind of story, but it's also nostalgic for me because I read these in middle school and it just brings me so much love and joy for reading. But anyway, that whole series is wonderful, but I love The Magician's Nephew because it's how Narnia came to be, and who doesn't like a fun creation story? Number 9 is Rose Madder from Stephen King. The 3 words that come to mind for this book are triumphant, rage, and gutsy. Now, Rose Madder is about a woman named Rosie, and she lives in the most horrific circumstances in an abusive relationship with her husband. Her husband is a cop who specializes in missing people, and he has a violent temper, and he abuses her in the most horrific, awful ways. She's had multiple miscarriages due to his violence and rage, and he is escalating. He is accused of doing some awful things to women in the community. He's under investigation by the Internal Affairs. Now Rosie's fearing for her life, and she realizes that he's going to kill her if she doesn't escape. So she escapes, and she is able to start building a new life for herself. She ends up at a pawn shop. She's looking to hawk her engagement ring, and while in the store, she comes across this painting of a woman in a Rose Madder gown. Now, if you don't know, Rose Madder is the name of a pigment for clothing, I guess. So that's where the term Rose Madder comes from. She's drawn to this painting, and she ends up taking it with her. She's rebuilding her life and becoming happier, and her life just seems to have hope and a future in it. This painting starts changing and evolving, and at some point she has these dreams or at least she thinks they're dreams, where she's entering this painting and she goes into this world inside the painting and helps the lady in red with some issues. And the woman, Rosie calls her Rose Madder. Rose Madder makes a promise to Rosie that she'll repay her and that she's indebted to Rosie. Throughout this entire time, we also follow Norman, the abusive husband, and his obsession with finding Rosie. And it comes to a head where he does find her. I'm not going to tell you what happens, but in true Stephen King fashion, there's some really horrific, murderous, just gut-wrenching things that happen. But the main reason why I have this on my top 12 books is because of the impact it had on me. This particular book really dives into the emotional impact that abuse has on people, the resilience of the human spirit to overcome and persevere beyond the abuse, to survive despite these unsurmountable circumstances. It resonated with me because I grew up with abuse. It kind of made me shift my thinking a little bit and realizing that the abuse and the things I went through don't define my life and that I can always change my life. Anyway, if you like horror stories, thriller novels, you like Stephen King, this is a really good read because it really dives more into that emotional aspect of abuse and the perseverance of the human spirit. Okay, another hard hitter is number 10 with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. Ooh, I read this in high school. I cried and I cried. The three words that come to mind when I think of this book are strength, courage, and purpose. Now, Maya Angelou is a poet, a writer, a prolific writer whose work just moved the world. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is an autobiographical account of her life from early childhood into early adulthood. She grows up in the Deep South and her mother and father are absentee parents who can't be bothered to take care of her and her brother. So they end up living with her grandmother, who is a very strict Christian religious authority in their lives. Eventually, her mom comes back into the picture and takes her and her brother away from their grandma to live with her. And she has a boyfriend who her at 8 years old. As a child who's endured this horrific abuse, her behavior starts changing and people start suspecting something happened to her, and she finally confesses what happened to her and she tells the court what happened, and the mom's boyfriend is convicted, gets out of jail. He's murdered by one of Maya's uncles or cousins or someone in the family to avenge the abuse that Maya went through. As a result, Maya went mute for, I think it was close to 6 years. She stopped talking for 6 years because she was so afraid that what she would say could harm somebody, because in her mind it caused a man's death and she didn't want to be responsible for anyone else's deaths. Reading this book kind of made me think about it in a way that separated myself from it, but also made me feel less alone in my experiences because someone was talking about it. Maya Angelou talked about it long before Me Too and long before any of these social movements. This was published in the 1960s. It was published at a time where most of these topics were taboo, and they're still taboo in a lot of circles. That's why it's still banned in a lot of schools. And throughout the rest of the book, it talks about her kind of coming back into herself, and the concept of the caged bird is her feeling trapped in her own mind and her own body and trauma from what she experienced and not being able to talk about it and feeling caged. And yet when she discovers the freedom of being able to talk, she frees herself from the trauma and from the guilt and from the oppression that her abuser put her through. And it's such a prolific story. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. Number 11 is All Over But the Shoutin by Rick Bragg. This is a book that I was introduced to in high school and I still to this day love it. The three words that come to mind for this book are perseverance, delicious, and powerful. Rick Bragg is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. I don't know if he still writes, but he was a New York Times journalist who has an evocative way of writing, and his use of the English language is why I call this book delicious. It's such a literary treat. His use of words to describe different things are just so juicy, so crisp and crunchy, and all of these things. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's such a treat. You think about things in such a unique way, and you see it from his perspective and you see it from his mother's perspective. So his memoir takes you through the grueling reality of what it's like to grow up in poverty in the Deep South. He grew up with an horribly abusive father who is an alcoholic and also absent. Leaving his mother to work and to fend for the family, she acted as a shield against the abuse, and she also was self-sacrificing. A common theme or a common reference in the book is this thought that she didn't even buy herself clothing. She went without a new dress for 18 years so that her kids could have clothes for school. He overcame unsurmountable odds and became a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He talks about his life through the perspective of his mother, who is not only proud of him but in awe and wonder of him, but he also talks about it with humility. It's not like he's bragging about his life. He just talks about his life and his struggles through his mother's perspective and the things that she never had, and the juxtaposition of her having nothing to him getting everything he could ever want and working towards this amazing life by attending Harvard and getting these opportunities that people could only ever dream of. As someone who is beginning my own writing journey at that young age of 15, I thought about how I could convey a story and yet make it interesting. And it still to this day is one of those books that I think back on with such fondness, that shaped the way I look at literature, the way I think about words, and yet make poetry in prose. If you're into memoirs and you love literary treats like that, you gotta pick this up. It's so good. Last but certainly not least is Anthem by Ayn Rand. I think that's how you say her name. She's a Russian philosopher writer. The three words that come to mind for this book are dystopian, provocative, and esteem. So Ayn Rand is probably most known for her book called Atlas Shrugged. She also wrote The Fountainhead. But this was my first dive into any of her works, and I read this back in high school as well. It was on one of those lists of books you should read before you die, and so I thought, well, it's a short book, let me read it. And when I read it, I had to reread a lot of the sections multiple times because it was just so different than what I was used to with fiction. It takes place in a future of a dystopian society where people live in castes and their careers and their roles in society are predetermined, and there's no escaping that. There's no challenging society. You don't even have a name. There's no individualism. Everything is for the society, for the greater good. Until we meet Equality 72521. I have to look at my notes for this because I can never remember the full name of that character. We're just going to call him Equality, okay? So Equality starts realizing that he doesn't really want to stay in the role that was predetermined for him. He starts conducting these science experiments in secret, and he's later discovered and found out, and he flees. With him comes this woman who is his love interest. Her name is Liberty 3000, but we're just going to call her Liberty. So together they escape and they plan to build a new society. They come upon a house and they discover things from a foreign past that's a history of unspeakable themes. They discover this concept of individualism because in this dystopian society, the words I, me, myself, you, yourself don't exactly exist. They're forbidden words. Nobody knows what they are. The identity of oneself doesn't exist. You are just part of a collective. Ayn Rand is known for her philosophical beliefs and for her writing about this philosophy called objectivism. And her belief was that socialism, communism are societal constructs that strip away individualism and make things worse for society. It's social commentary on her very anti-communist views. It's a thought-provoking book. Even if you don't necessarily agree with her socio-political views, I think it was a fascinating read because it challenged me to think about society in a different way, to think about the value of people. It's short enough that you could probably get through it pretty quickly, especially if you enjoy the plot. So, that that is a lot of talking. I hope you enjoyed your snack and beverage because it probably required you having one to sit through this whole video. Again, let me know if you've read any of these books and if you agree or even if you disagree about some of my choices here. Anywho, I thank you for hanging out with me today and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.